Holy shit, fanboys and fangirls. Welcome to Fanboy with an Opinion for September 2020. Now, in today's episode, I thought about talking about the movies in 1994. I'd done this before. I did it with the movies in 1998. And 94 is another big year of movies. And it's going to be interesting to kind of dissect some of these movies. But before we get into that, I usually like to talk about what I've been watching for the past month. And, before I forget, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this video. If you're listening on Anchor, make sure to watch the videos on YouTube instead. Maybe you like that better. But at any expense, join our YouTube page. You don't even have to watch the videos if you don't like doing that. So what I've been watching, so I watched this documentary series on Netflix called High Score, and I'm sure most people have already watched it who are watching this or are part of the Gamerish Network. It was amazing. It was great. It tells the history of video games, starting with arcades. I guess it doesn't really start exactly the history of video games or arcades, but it starts off with the first arcade that became really popular, which was Space Invaders. And then it just goes on from there, and each episode chronicles different parts of video game history. Mostly like, there's one episode about Nintendo, and then Sega, and the beginning of the console wars when Nintendo and Sega. So I thought, though, and this might seem a little controversial, the first two episodes were really engaging, extremely interesting, whether you're into video games or not. But as the series went on, the episodes got a little bit, it lagged. And what I mean by that is it got boring at some points. Not all the time, not in every episode. Oh yeah, maybe after the first two, they started to kind of dip the episodes where they would be interesting at some points, and then other times were just a little tedious because the episodes were kind of, in a way, the same kind of format. Whereas like somebody would have a crazy story about how they got a game created or a game published. And again, it just felt like we kind of seen this already, this kind of format already. But it was still interesting nonetheless. I'm just saying it got a little slow after episode 2. But it's a definite must watch, especially if you're a gamer. Even if you're not, but especially if you're a gamer. Another movie, a movie I watched was called Lake Mungo. So Lake Mungo is on Amazon Prime. And Amazon Prime is a good source for offbeat movies. They're a good source for shitty movies, but offbeat movies as well. Lake Mungo is from Australia. It's from 2008, and it's a horror/thriller. And it's a story about a family who lose their daughter to drowning. And they vacation at Lake Mungo, and they lose the daughter during the vacation. So it's a mockumentary, the movie, which means that it's a fake documentary. So it's in the style of a documentary, and the family are telling what happened and then the events that, happened after her death, her parents' suicide. They start to find out that she had a secret life, and there's a little more delving into the family dynamic. And so it's just like the story of the daughter having this secret life and what it leads, what secrets she was hiding, and how that affected her death in any way. It's a really fucked up movie. It's really sad, but it's also haunting because at one point they think that her spirit is trying to speak to them, by reappearing. I recommend the movie. It's a little slow. So here's the problem. I think that documentaries have a bad rap in that they're seen as boring. And I think they may not be seen as that way now, but 15, 20, 30 years ago, they were kind of seen as slow and boring, and also, what's the word, stodgy. They're also seen stodgy, like definition of that is like dull and boring and uninteresting. And I think that documentaries were kind of seen as like a highbrow thing. So like a lot of times documentaries would win awards, or they would be regarded by critics, and the general public just usually didn't watch them. And also to the fact that the main the source material for the documentary might be boring. They might put out a documentary for sex life of birds or something, like the way the birds migrate south for the winter. So it's like a 2-hour documentary about that, and the general public's not really going to want to see that. So that's why you see documentaries nowadays, again, in the past like 10, 15 years, have become a little bit more, they talk about a wide range of topics now. And, I just mentioned Game Over. I mean, seriously, 30 years ago, they never would have made a docuseries about video games. And even docuseries have become popular now. As you look at like Netflix and other streaming sites, that's their bread and butter, especially Netflix. Netflix has tons of docuseries. But there was a time when documentaries were seen as boring. And again, it's not just the source material, but also the way that they're shot and the way that they're formatted. The style of a documentary just comes off as boring. So with that long explanation said, Lake Mungo tends to feel like a typical documentary, whereas a lot of interviews and a lot of talking, and this is supposed to be a horror thriller, and you do get some, you don't really necessarily get scares, but I would say you get a lot of chills. What I mean by that is that there's no jump scares, but there are creepy things, and there's definitely a lot of creepy elements. So if you don't mind, they like to say it's a slow burn. That's a phrase that a lot of people like to use when it comes to boring movies. So it is a slow burn for a while, but there's also a good payoff. I feel like this is a good payoff. And if you are going to watch Lake Mungo, I suggest you watch the credits, at least the first part of the credits, because it has like a MCU type of surprise scenes, or whatever they're called, scenes in the credits. So definitely wait till the credits. But it was a decent movie, nonetheless. The other thing that I've been watching, so October is approaching. In fact, when this airs, it will be the last week of September. So October is around the corner, and that means Halloween. So full disclosure, Halloween is my favorite holiday of the year. Now, no, I don't go dressed up in a costume, going door to door, demanding candy, as my favorite Teletubby or whatever joke you want to insert here. But I do love horror movies. I love all kinds of horror movies. And I just like the spirit of Halloween, I guess, and not the store. Well, actually, I do like the store because it's fun to walk around and see all the different kinds of costumes. Sexy gingerbread man and sexy dentist and, sexy insert joke here. So with that said, my wife and I are already starting to get into the spirit of watching horror movies. And every year what we do is we'll watch a bunch of horror movies in October or towards Halloween or in or around Halloween. And I like to write mini reviews about the movies that we watch, and then I post them on Facebook. So this year is no exception, and this is actually the second year in a row that we're going to be doing this kind of thing. So last year we called it 13 Nights of Halloween, so this night's going to be called The Return of 13 Nights of Halloween. And what we do is we watch 13 consecutive, a movie a night, 13 nights leading up to Halloween. And so we're getting prepared for that. And that's one of the reasons why we watch Lake Mungo. But that's not good enough to be a review. So, because it really wasn't that scary. It was just creepy. But we have been thinking about watching certain movies and acquiring certain movies so we can then watch when the 13 Nights arrive. And then be sure to see those reviews I will post on the Gamerish Facebook group. So anyway, to kind of get prepared in that, we've been watching reruns of Tales from the Crypt. So Tales from the Crypt was a show on HBO. I think it was from 89 to, I want to say 96. So yeah, it first premiered in 1989 and ended in 96. So it was an anthology show on HBO, and every week was a different story, and it was read by the Crypt Keeper. These were based on comic books. So there was a comic book put out in the 50s, 40s, and 50s, probably 50s, by EC Comics called Tales from the Crypt. And there were other ones like shock and suspense stories. What were the other ones? Crime stories. Tales from the Vault, I think, was one of them. These were just different comics that were all made by the same publishing company. And so HBO took these stories and they made episodes out of them. So one of the things is that the series was produced and directed by all sort of big names, or at least at the time were big names, like Robert Zemeckis, who's a hack, and other people. I'm trying to think, the guy who did the Lethal Weapon movies and Superman the movie, and Richard Donner, he directed a few, he produced a few. So there were also a lot of stars in the movie, big stars, big actors, actresses in the movie, or at least in the show. And a lot of actors and actresses who would then go on to be big. Like Brad Pitt was in an episode, and he was like really young at the time, and he wasn't anywhere near as famous as he is now. So we started watching them. We loved them as a kid when they were originally out, and just started rewatching them to get a sense of if they're as good as we remember, or is it just nostalgia? It's hit or miss. We finished the first season, which was only 6 episodes. We just started the second season. As I said, it was on for like, 6 episodes, 6 seasons, 7 seasons. And there are some great episodes. I mean, we've rewatched some of these episodes before, so they still hold up. And then there are other episodes that just aren't that great, whether it be the acting or the storyline. See, this is the thing. So if you watch the show at any given point, you'll notice that there are common themes in the show. Like, for instance, there's the theme of a husband and wife, and the wife is cheating on the husband, or vice versa. And then that leads to murder or whatever. That's a common theme in a lot of the episodes. The problem is these episodes were adapted from comic books that were written in the 50s. So Tales from the Crypt is known for being horror and horrific and somewhat bloody, but they were also known for the art. I mean, Tales from the Crypt ended up closing its doors because the government, it's the whole thing, but the government kind of forced them to close their doors. The reason why is because they thought it was too violent for children. So the art was always what got them in hot water. And the art's fucking amazing. The art's amazing for the comic, some of the best art in Golden Age comics. But the writing is it's of its time. And so some of the episodes are a little hokey and a little corny. And you got to remember, it's because these were written, half a century ago, or more than half a century ago. But with that said, again, some of them are still interesting. Because like a lot of the time, the story seems to jump. Like there's not a lot of explanation. And there's just a lot of the time, there's just things that don't make sense. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. The first episode of the show is about an executioner for a prison, and he loses his job. He runs a electric chair, and he loves his job, and he loves electricity. And so because the state changes their policy on the death penalty, he loses his job. And then he decides he's going to start murdering bad guys because he feels like it's still his job. It's a lot like Dexter. But then he gets caught, and he then ends up in the electric chair. So a lot of the episodes are Twilight Zone, where it's like this twist ending, where people get what they deserve. And in some episodes, they don't get what they deserve. But a lot of this twist ending idea. So he then goes into the electric chair. And in the beginning of the episode, we see an inmate, the way that they're crying and begging and pleading not to put them in the chair. We see that in the beginning with another prisoner, and then at the end, we see the executioner act the same way. Now, the problem with that is the legislation being passed for a state to overturn the death penalty in the episode literally happens within like minutes. That would not happen. Him going to prison and immediately getting the death penalty may not happen. Just because a state has the death penalty open doesn't necessarily mean every prisoner, every inmate is going to get that death penalty. And on top of that, it can take years before an inmate gets the death penalty. I mean, sometimes it takes 20, 30 years. So it's just all these things, these realistic things, you kind of got to just put in the back of your mind and not really think about it. Because again, this is a 30-minute TV show. So they got to cram everything as much as they can. Plus, it's adapted from a comic book that was only, or a comic book story that was only, 6 or 7 pages long. The books were anthologies just like the show. So a lot of those stories are very, very short. Anyway, I think I've talked too much about this, but I still do like the show. The episodes are uneven. Second season gets really good because there's one episode with Don Rickles and another stand-up comedian who was in the Police Academy movies, Bobcat Goldthwait, and it is a very creepy and disturbing episode. So if you like horror, if you like some scares, but if you like some gore and you like some disturbing stuff, definitely watch Crypt Keeper. I mean, Tales from the Crypt. I just saw the word, that's why. Definitely watch Tales from the Crypt. We just watched one episode where Arnold Schwarzenegger directed it. And as far as I know, it's like one of the very few and only things he directed. And the direction isn't bad in the episode, to be honest, but the story itself is just kind of like uneven. Angers up the blood too. Like I said, a lot of the common themes. Women are horrible and men are just greedy, vicious, vengeful assholes. So I think that's going to then bring me to my main story. The movies of 1994. So I was a mere youth. I was like a teenager. So there were a lot of great movies that came out of this year. And I'm going to continue looking at these different decades that had a lot of great movies. I mean, these are movies that people still talk about, people still watch, people are still influenced by. I broke up these movies into 5 different categories. Love, self-explanatory. Like, these are movies that are okay. Guilty pleasures, honorable mentions, and movies I hate. Now, I'm only going to be mentioning movies that I have an opinion about, whether they be negative or positive. So I might have missed a movie that you might like or missed a movie that you feel is important. So you could just let me know in the comments below if I missed anything that I should have talked about, and I might. The honorable mentions are going to be movies that, for one reason or another, I'm going to mention. I may not like them, I may not hate them, I may be indifferent towards them, but for whatever reason, there's a significance. So what's interesting about 1989, for instance, which I previously talked about, was I feel like that was definitely the year of the sequel. There were tons of sequels, and sequels that made a lot of money. Lethal Weapon 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But for 94, it's a very interesting, as I was going over the movies that came out that year. I'll go over them when I speak about them, but you'll see common ideas and common themes. Big stars. Big actors who had big movies and were bankable stars at one point. 94 is not a good year for them. 94 was not a good year for a lot of them. And I'll mention that as I go on. The independent movie started to become a real moneymaker. These were movies that had very low budgets and premiered at film festivals. Film festivals was like Sundance Film Festival was another thing that started to get really popular and more mainstream. Not extremely mainstream, but a lot of these movies I'm going to talk about were movies that premiered at Sundance and then got a wider release because of that. If anything, this is the year of Jim Carrey. So this is the year that 3 major movies came out of Jim Carrey's and catapulted him into stardom. Really, I'm going to go over the top 10 grossing movies of 94, and you'll see that Jim Carrey's got 2 of them. Let's see what else before we get into it. Like I said, I'll go over it when I get to it. One more thing was I created a poll in the Gamerish Network Facebook group, which you could join. I believe a link to our link tree will be in the comments below. And please join our Facebook Gamerish Network page if you aren't already a member. So I named, I think it was like 5 movies, and I asked people, what are your favorite movies? So let me go into them now. So these were the 6 that I added were Lion King, Pulp Fiction, Clerks, Forrest Gump, and Dumb and Dumber. So already right off the bat, these are the big movies from 94. And then Felice Cat, shout out to Felice Cat, she added a few movies. Now I just wanted to clarify, the movies that she added, I agree, are good movies and should have been in the poll. But I only wanted to add, originally I only wanted to add first, some of the movies that were in the top grossing movies of that year, and also some movies that are just extremely influential. Not to say that I don't agree with what she wrote. I totally agree with what she wrote. And I left the option open for people to add their own movies, so it's fine. It's just that I personally didn't want, not personally, I should say, originally, I didn't want to bog the whole poll with, 10 different movies. But I'm totally cool with what she did because, I would pick the movies she added over the ones I did, So she added The Professional, Interview with a Vampire, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, let me be clear. All of these movies, including the ones that she added, I will be talking about. But the number 1 movie in this poll was The Lion King with 15, 16, 17, 18 votes. I was very surprised about how many people actually voted for The Lion King because you also got Pulp Fiction in there and Forrest Gump and Interview with a Vampire. These are popular movies. Pulp Fiction is probably considered Quentin Tarantino's best movie. And it's also the movie that catapulted him into stardom. Same thing with Clerks. But Pulp Fiction, Clerks, Professional, they all tied for second with 5, 6, 7, 8 votes each. And then Forrest Gump is 6. And then Forrest Gump and Interview tied with 6. Then it was Dumb and Dumber with 5. Then it was New Nightmare, which is 3. But again, we'll get into them. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with all the movies that I love, and we're going to go in alphabetical order. So the first one is Clerks. So I love Clerks. I haven't watched this movie in a long time. Keep in mind, I'm going to try to talk about these as quickly as possible because there are a lot of them. I haven't watched Clerks in a long time. I love Clerks. It did make Kevin Smith into a household name or a big director. I don't really think he's made anything as good as Clerks, although Mallrats comes pretty close, but Mallrats is fucking ridiculous compared to the reality that Clerks is. Because I have worked at retail and I've been on the other side of that register, and I could definitely relate to a lot of the things that were said. For instance, when the joke is said that in the video, you know, I worked at a, I shouldn't have said that when I made that move, but I worked at a Blockbuster, and there were people that came in and asked, you know, do you know that movie with that guy in it? So a lot of the jokes were real, and it just seems like he's never been able to capture that lightning in a bottle again. But there are problems with the movie. You know, some people have said the acting, I thought the acting's fine. The acting's fine, and it does give us Jan Silent Bob, so that's a good thing and a bad thing. So the next movie I want to talk about is Crumb. Now, Crumb is a documentary. Now, I briefly just mentioned how documentaries can come off boring and stodgy, and that's another thing about '94 is that there were a few documentaries that really made it into the mainstream. And Crumb is kind of one of them. Crumb is about Robert Crumb. Robert Crumb was an artist in the 70s, and he was part of an underground comic book movement. And what I mean by underground is that they were extremely independent, and they weren't part of the big two at the time, which was just Marvel and DC. Harvey Pekar is another big name, and he had his own movie in the 2000s. But so Robert Crumb is this independent artist, and he's an amazing artist. He's probably one of the, I mean, in my opinion, one of the best artists of all time, but he's never done anything major. You know, it's just a lot of independent stuff and, or underground stuff. And his subject matter is kind of a little iffy. He is, lack of a better term, a strange character. And if you've ever watched American Splendor about Harvey Pekar, you'll see a little Robert Crumb in there. And Robert Crumb is a weird person. And then you get to meet his brothers, and his brothers are even weirder. It's a very interesting documentary. It is not boring at all. It's creepy and it's disturbing. So speaking of creepy and disturbing, the next one is Ed Wood. I love Ed Wood. Ed Wood is probably one of my favorite Tim Burton movies of all time, directed by Tim Burton, starring Johnny Depp. I think it was their second collaboration together. Someone should go back in time and tell them to stop collaborating with each other. It's about Ed Wood, who was a movie director. He directed a lot of shitty movies. He directed some of the worst movies of all time, considered some of the movies worst of all time. Plan 9 from Outer Space. And it's actually a really good movie. Because what's interesting about Ed Wood, at least the way he's portrayed in the movie, is he's very idealistic. And he's a fan of movies, and he loves directing, and he loves making movies, but he's just awful at it. And he just doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand that nobody wants to see these movies. And he just tries so hard to be the best at something he's not good at. And it kind of reminds me of Tommy Wiseau from The Room. And what's interesting about this movie is Johnny Depp has said on record that there are no real interviews of Ed Wood. So he didn't know how to play him. But based on his movies and based on his life, he just figured he was, like I said, a very positive, upbeat, idealistic person. So the next movie is In the Mouth of Madness, and this is directed by John Carpenter. So John Carpenter, as you know, did The Thing and Halloween, and he made these trilogy of movies called the Apocalypse Trilogy. And so the first one was The Thing. The second one was The Prince of Darkness, which is another favorite Carpenter movie. And the third one was In the Mouth of Madness. So this movie came out in '94, as we know. And this, in my opinion, is the last good John Carpenter movie. He has not made a good movie since. Not one. You can see where he just stopped caring. And this is the movie where he stopped caring. he made a sequel to Escape from New York called Escape from LA, which he admitted to not even fully directing. Kurt Russell directed a good chunk of that. Every movie he made after In the Mouth of Madness just is not good. So this is like one of the reasons why I love this movie, because it's his last good one. And it's a batshit crazy movie. It's about, I think he's an insurance investigator. It's about this horror writer, Sutter Kane, notice the initials SK, and how his books of literature are coming to life. So the next is Interview with the Vampire Chronicles with Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, blah, blah, blah. I do love this movie as well. This is actually so out of the 10 top grossing movies of 94, this was number 9, and it grossed over 223 million, which doesn't really seem like a lot in these days, but I don't know inflation. I'm sure with inflation that would be closer to $1 billion. Anyway, Interview with Vampire, based on a book by Anne Rice. I read the book. I actually did a pod on that. Didn't care for it. Liked the movie way, way better. I guess I shouldn't say I didn't care for it. It was okay. But liked the movie a lot better. I recommend the movie. What else can I say about it? It's about a vampire, Louis, who tells his story to a young writer. And Tom Cruise plays Lestat. And if anyone knows anything about the Vampire Chronicles, people love Lestat. I'm not a Tom Cruise fan, full disclosure. I don't think he's a great actor. But as I've said before, and I've said before on this pod, everyone has at least one good movie. With Tom Cruise, though, he has more than one. And this is one of them. He's great in it. He's actually pretty good in it. So the next one is Leon, or The Professional, directed by Luc Besson. Now, I love The Professional. The Professional is one of my favorite movies for a long, long time. I mean, I still love the movie. I think it's in my top 100. But for a long time, I only knew it as The Professional. And then years later, I realized that in other countries that are not America, it's known as Leon. But now, with the internet, people just refer to it as Leon the Professional, even in America. Anyway, it stars Jean Reno, and he plays a hitman, and this is Natalie Portman's first movie. And she was amazing in this movie. Like, she started her career really high with this, and then as a child, she kind of didn't have the success that she did with this. And then when she became an adult, she was more of a successful actress. But she's amazing in this. This is a great movie. Gary Oldman's in this, and Gary Oldman is great. Gary Oldman was always, at the time, was known for playing villains. Kind of got typecasted as a villain. And so, like, the Jim Gordon character in the Batman movies kind of is like his resurrection in a way. Anyway, he's amazing in this. This is a great movie. The beginning scene is the best part, probably, is when Leon literally comes out of the darkness. It's either the last scene or the end. It's a great movie. So I'm going to be a little controversial here, probably. Maverick. There's a movie called Maverick, and it's not a Top Gun movie. It was directed by the aforementioned Richard Donner I mentioned before. It stars Mad Mel Gibson, Jodie Foster. So it's based on a TV show from the 60s, a cowboy Western TV show. And Maverick is like he's a card player, plays a lot of poker, but he's basically a con man. It's a fun movie. I don't know if people really know about it or care for it, but I'll always watch it when it's on. The next one is Naked Gun 33 and a Third. Now, I love the Naked Gun movies. Probably one of my favorite film series of all time. I saw this in the theater, and I didn't care for it as much as I did the first one and the second one. I liked it, but it wasn't as funny. It had a different director than the other two. they were used, recycling some of the same jokes, and the new jokes just weren't that great. There is a little bit of a storyline that doesn't really hold up in today's standards, and it obviously is not the best one out of the three. But the more I've watched it, the more I've appreciated some of the comedy in it, and I do think it's I think it's funnier than it was when I first saw it. But yeah, you got to watch the Nathan Young movies. So the next one is Natural Born Killers, directed by Oliver Stone. This is interesting because this was originally written by Quentin Tarantino, but then Oliver Stone got his hands on the script and changed it. So this is about Mickey and Mallory Knox, who are serial killers. They're criminals, but they're serial killers. And they travel across the country, murdering people here and there. But the interesting part about it is they become celebrities because of it. And the media turns them into celebrities. And that was the one part of Quentin Tarantino's script that stayed in the movie, was the idea that the media turns murderers and killers into stars, celebrities. But Oliver Stone, Quentin Tarantino has said on record that he hates this movie because he hates the way that his script was twisted and manipulated and turned into this. But I think that Oliver Stone does a good job of framing everything. And he uses a lot of visual tricks to manipulate you. And in some ways, he creates this movie almost into like a piece of artwork. So what I mean by that is Robert Downey Jr. is in the movie, and he plays the main offender when it comes to the media. And he's like almost like a TMZ. This is years before TMZ. He had one of those kinds of TV shows like Current Affair or Extra, where it's a lot about gossip. So he constantly reports on Mickey and Mallory, and in doing so, creates them as superstar celebrities. So there's a lot of I'm butchering this word. You know what? There's a lot of juxtaposition, as I try to get that word out of my mouth, that Oliver Stone does, particularly with Robert Downey Jr. Because the point is, Robert Downey Jr. is the true villain of the movie. And there's a lot of times where he will be framed as the devil. So towards the end of the movie, I think he makes a comment about, so Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis are in as Woody Harrelson plays Mickey, and Mickey says to him, "You're not a bad guy." And then it quickly cuts to Robert Downey Jr. dressed as a devil, covered in blood. And it's like a real quick second. I don't know if it's quick enough where you would miss it, but you may not understand what you're seeing. But he cuts away as he says, "You're not a bad guy," and shows him dressed up as a devil, because the point is that Robert Downey Jr. is a bad guy and is the bad guy. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of cutting and juxtapositions. So again, that's why I said it's almost like art in a way. So another controversial movie that no one has heard of, is Nobody's Fool. Nobody's Fool is a movie of Paul Newman, who was already really old at this point. And it's just a decent movie. It might be boring to some, but it's interesting to me. It's about an old man who works in construction, and he's really a loser. But he has a charm about him and a silver tongue, if you will. And he gets he's what's the word? Skated through life, or coasted through life with his charm and what looks he had and his silver tongue. And so it's just he's at the end of his life, and he's a selfish and self-centered person, but at the same time, he finds himself helping other people. No, it's an interesting movie. Another movie no one's heard of is called Once Were Warriors. Well, Once Were Warriors was a foreign movie. It's from New Zealand, and it is a fucked up movie. So the indigenous people from New Zealand are called I hope I'm not butchering this too much, the Maori. And the Maori, again, are their native people, the indigenous people in New Zealand. The problem with the Maori is they were once a proud people, hence the title Once Were Warriors, because that's what they were. They were warriors. But fast forward to 1994, they're kind of seen as beneath New Zealanders. And so this whole movie is just casted, with Maori people. Maori, I can't pronounce it, but the indigenous people of New Zealand. It's all cast in this movie. And it's about this one family, and they're, the father, the patriarch of the family is not a good person. He's a drunk, he's abusive, he's extremely violent. And the matriarch, the mother, has to deal with this at the same time trying to protect her children. I think there's like 5 kids. And there's a lot about pride. There's a lot about pride. And the father is proud, but he can't get a job. He has a horrible alcohol problem and a terrible violent streak. And it's just, how far can you go before you get out of that situation? What's your breaking point? And it's just really sad. And it's this narrative of like, these were proud people, and now they're just, first of all, there's almost none of them left in New Zealand to begin with. And now the ones that are left don't have any pride. And, spoiler alert, they end up, the mother ends up leaving them, taking their kids. But it's also a lot about their, where they came from. The oldest son, joins a gang, who the gang are kind of influenced and maybe obsessed with the old ways, like the tattooing, a lot of tattoos on their face, but they maybe misconstrued the way the Maori people used to be. Like they still want to be warriors, but more like a gang. Yeah, it's just a good movie. It's a really good movie. It's really sad though, but it has an uplifting ending. Another movie I love from '94, PCU. PCU is I love this movie, but I do know it's not great. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen Animal House, but Animal House is about, fraternities and craziness that happens in college. Movie hasn't really held up that much or that well. But PCU, in my opinion, was like them trying to make Animal House, but for the 90s. Like I said, I was a teenager in '94, so I was a little bit younger than college age, like 4 or 5 years younger than that. But it kind of resonated with me because I was like, I wished that's what college was like. And PCU probably doesn't hold up as well either. Not as bad as Animal House, though. But a lot of the theme in PCU is that when you go to college, you end up joining a group that protests and complains too much. It sounds way more insensitive than it actually is, because I think it's more, the movie's saying more of like, relax and have a good time rather than protest. I don't know. Again, maybe it's not as maybe it's not, doesn't hold up as well as I think it does. But it's a stupid comedy, straight up stupid comedy. The next one is Pulp Fiction. Of course, no need to describe what Pulp Fiction is. Quentin Tarantino's second movie, but his like first movie that really catapulted him. Won a bunch of awards, got nominated for other awards. Surprisingly, not in the top 10, but I think it grossed enough. And I'm sure it's in the like top 15, top 20. So next movie is Speed. I really do like Speed. Actually, I don't know if I would put this in the like of a love, because I probably loved it more when it first came out. Obviously stars Keanu Reeves, and this was on the top 10 grossing movies in '94 at number 5. And it grossed over $350 million. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock and Dennis Hopper is a great villain. This was Sandra Bullock's like one of her early roles. And again, this is a movie that catapulted. You'll see a lot of this in this list, a lot of movies where the actors or actresses were still kind of new. And then it just catapulted them into wherever. So yeah, Speed, you know, bus can't go over 65 or explodes. Great action movie. I think it still holds up for the most part. Keanu Reeves is having like a resurgence right now. So definitely people, if you haven't watched it, you should go back and watch it. It's a silly premise, but executed very well. So next one is The Crow. And The Crow was considered my favorite movie for a very long time. Saw it in the theater and loved it. Obviously, it was based on a comic book, so that's part of the reason why I loved it. And tragically, it starred Brandon Lee, who died in the middle of making the movie. He's actually died from a prop gun. It was supposed to have a dummy bullet in it, but it didn't. And you know, they went back and he died, and they were almost done with the movie when he died, but they ended up having to use stand-ins and early CGI to kind of keep him in the movie. I think nowadays, if you look at some of the scenes, you might be able to tell what was CGI. You could definitely tell who was a stand-in, because if they don't show his face, most likely it was a stand-in. But still, really good movie, very dark movie. Like dark as in themes, but also physically dark. It's like such a dark movie. Next one is The Shawshank Redemption, starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. I mean, you know, this is considered one of the best movies of all time. Surprisingly, not in the top 10. But the reason why, or the reason for that, I don't think the movie did that well, or at least the movie did okay. And it wasn't until videotape, when it went on videotape, that got word of mouth. And, you know, this is pre-internet days when people would just tell you personally how good a movie was. For example, I mean, when I was in high school, and one of my teachers told me about the movie. She was dogging. She was like, "You gotta watch it, gotta watch it, gotta watch it, gotta watch it." I didn't want to watch it because I thought it was boring or going to be boring, and I watched it and I was blown away. Now, with all that said, there are problems with the movie. There are a lot of problems with the movie. Some things don't make sense. For instance, you know, for Andy or Tim Robbins to escape the prison, he had to crawl through a pipe of shit, essentially shit, for like he uses the analogy of football fields. So like 2 or 3 football fields, whatever the number is, that could kill you. Like if you go into, you know, like some houses have cesspools, but we don't have cesspools in New York City, at least not in the 5 boroughs. Like if you go in Long Island and stuff, they might have cesspools, but we don't have cesspools. But if you were to go into a cesspool and clean said cesspool and accidentally fall into said cesspool, that could kill you. The fumes would just be so much. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'd have to talk to Dr. Farts about that, but I think, you know, that would probably kill your lungs and it would kill you. So to crawl into a pipe full of shit would kill you. Plus, when he makes the hole into the pipe, you see him put his head into the hole. He barely fits his head. Like he wouldn't even be able to fit his shoulders, let alone the rest of his body. That's really how you indicate how you know you're going to get into a hole, is if it fits your shoulders. Then the rest of you would be good. But if it doesn't do that, you can't get out of it. You can't get into the hole, said hole. So there are a lot of inconsistencies and problems with the movie. But it's still a well-made movie, very well-acted movie, and has a good message of hope. So the next movie is True Lies, directed by James Cameron, who is also now a hack, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was actually in the top 10 grossing movies, number 3. This was the third grossing movie of 94 with over 378 million. I saw this in the theater. Here's the thing about me. I love Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Up to a point, ever since he came back acting after he was the Governor, I haven't really watched a lot of those movies. I've wanted to, but they're not as great, and they don't capture the spirit or the fun attitude a lot of his 80s movies did. I could go on and on about Schwarzenegger versus Stallone. I know I think Schwarzenegger is a better action star than Stallone. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the movies that he chose. Schwarzenegger wasn't afraid to do genre movies. I mean, he did tons of sci-fi movies, and almost every sci-fi movie he did was very popular or well received. But True Lies is probably one of his last good movies. He did Eraser, which is like a year or two later. And that movie's just okay. But True Lies is fun. And True Lies is actually a really good action movie. It's a really decent action movie. Co-stars Jamie Lee Curtis and Tom Arnold. And Tom Arnold, who was a stand-up comedian, does a really good job, and still to this day does a good job. The only good thing he's ever done is this movie. And again, probably one of James Cameron's last good movies. So that's it for the love. Those are all the movies I really love from 1994. And some of those are like some of my favorite movies of all time. Pulp Fiction. Oh, I missed one. Star Trek Generations. So Star Trek Generations, I'm big into Star Trek, as most of you probably know. Generations was the first movie where they introduced, not introduced, but where they, it was the first Star Trek movie to star the cast from Star Trek The Next Generation. So it has some actors from the original Star Trek movies like William Shatner, and it's supposed to be a bridge between the original movies and the Next Generation movies. As far as Next Generation movies go, it's okay. It's second, like the second best, which isn't really saying much because they didn't do that many Next Generation movies, like 4. So I like it more than other people do. Most people will tell you it's okay or not one of the best. I mean, it's better than some of the other Star Trek movies. I could make a pod about that, but nobody wants to hear me rant about Star Trek movies. But anyway, I liked it. I mean, it's sad, and it's one of those movies where if you break down the storyline, it's kind of ridiculous. But I enjoyed it. So again, now we do it with the likes. Some of them are my favorite. Some of these are my favorite movies of all time. The Professional, Natural Born Killers, fucking Ed Wood, The Crow. Now let's get to the like. I'll go back quick with these. So there's a movie called The Low Down Dirty Shame with Keenan Ivory Wayans and Jada Pinkett Smith, actually. It's one of her favorite first movies or early movies. It was a good action movie. And I think I've always really enjoyed this movie. I haven't watched this movie forever, though. But I think it would still hold up. Keenan Ivory Wayans is a good action. He's good at it because it's his kind of role. Sarcastic character who's funny, but also good at the action. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. Now, this is the movie that, I keep using this word, catapulted Jim Carrey into stardom. So we haven't gotten into the Jim Carrey movies yet. but this is the first one. So obviously everyone's seen this movie probably. It's about Ace Ventura, and he's a pet detective. I like this movie. I don't know how much it holds up, but I think it's still funny. Airheads. This is one of those comedies that I should not like. I like dumb movies sometimes. I get on my high horse about high caliber movies or good movies, but I love dumb movies. Airheads is a dumb movie. I should really say I love this movie, but I think I've already put some movies I shouldn't love in the love category, so I'm already embarrassed about those. Airheads is just about a metal band trying to make it in the business, and they hijack a radio station with some hostages so they can get their song on the radio. It's fucking dumb. But Adam Sandler's in it, an early Adam Sandler role. Steve Buscemi's in it. Sorry, Steve Buscemi and Brendan Fraser. Anyways, it's got some memorable roles, memorable lines. It's funny. Blank Man, starring Damian Wayans, another Wayans movie. This is like an early superhero. I mean, it's not based on a comic book, but it is influenced by comic books. So an early superhero movie, and one that doesn't get enough credit, in my opinion. Smart, funny. Again, a lot of references to like the Batman TV show, but superheroes in general. Another movie is, I shouldn't even mention this. Another movie is called Cabin Boy, which I think is a cult movie. I haven't really mentioned if some of these are cult movies. Some of these are, but Cabin Boy is a cult movie. It stars a comedian named Chris Elliott, who, whatever, I'm done. The next one is Quiz Show. This was directed by Robert Redford, and this was like a big movie at the time. It's funny, Ace Ventura is not in the top 10, but we'll get to his Jim Carrey's contributions in the top 10 grossing movies in '94. So Quiz Show was directed by Robert Redford and was about you guessed it, quiz show in the 60s. And it was a very popular quiz show called 21. And, two people would get in booths and they'd be asked questions, and they had headphones on, and they were only able to listen to the questions asked them when it was fed into the headphones. Well, it turned out that they cheated. The show cheated. And they basically created these winners, these champions, so they could get views. It's basically like creating contestants that the audience liked. And if the audience liked them, they'd want to see them win. So they would make them win. And when they weren't liked enough, then they would make them lose. So there's a big congressional hearing about it. Very interesting movie. Ralph Fiennes is in it, who played Voldemort in the Harry Potter movies. It was a good movie. That's it for the liked. Now we're going to get in honorable mentions. And, there's a lot of them. Well, let's, I'll try to go through them as fast as I can, because we're already into close to an hour. I'm going to skip some of these. Who gives a fuck? Clear and Present Danger is a Harrison Ford movie. The only reason why I mentioned it is actually at number 10 in the top 10 grossing movies in '94 with over 215 million. Clear and Present Danger was kind of the movie that, or was it? He did this. So he plays, what's his name? Jack Ryan. And Jack Ryan is now popular in Amazon TV show, starring John Krasinski, but Harrison Ford wasn't the first person to portray Jack Ryan. That was Alec Baldwin, but Harrison Ford portrayed him in two movies, Patriot Games and this one. I forgot which one came first. But those two movies kind of resurrected Harrison Ford's career. Next. I'm not talking about that. Dumb and Dumber. This was number 7 in the top 10 grossing movies, over 247 million. This is the second Jim Carrey movie that we're talking about. I don't care for this movie. I know people love it, and I love dumb comedies, as I've already said, but this movie is just too dumb even for me. Forrest Gump. Now, this is the second highest top grossing movie of 1994 with over 677 million, which by today's standards would be way over $1 billion. You know, this was an Academy Award-winning movie, and I don't think it deserved it. You know, it beat Pulp Fiction, which I feel like that shouldn't have happened. So Forrest Gump beat Pulp Fiction and Shawshank Redemption, which is ridiculous. And if these movies were nominated today, I really think Lion King would have been in there, and Lion King would have had a good chance of winning. But that wasn't. I mean, because cartoons, animated movies at the time were just almost never nominated for Best Picture, unlike now. And they didn't have the Best Animated Movie like they do now. But anyway, I don't think Forrest Gump holds up. The CGI is awful. I mean, some of it doesn't make sense. It's just, I understand why people liked it, and I loved it at one point, but now I just don't think it holds up. I don't really care for it. And yeah, it shouldn't have won Best Picture. It's okay. It's okay. Next one is 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Now, this movie catapulted Hugh Grant into stardom. And the reason why I mention it is because of the top 10 grossing movies. This was number 8, surprisingly enough, with over 245 million. I'm briefly going to talk about this movie called Getting Even with Dad. This was Macaulay Culkin. Now, as I said in the beginning, this is a year of like big stars falling down. One of them was Macaulay Culkin. He was a big star with Home Alone and Home Alone 2. And 94, he has at least 3 movies that were the beginning of the end, where actually was the end, because I was looking at his filmography. One of these movies that are on this list is, I think, at least 3 of them. One of these movies was the last movie he would ever do as a kid. You know, he did some work when he was a young adult, but this ended his reign, so to speak. Hoop Dreams, a documentary about high school basketball. This was a very popular movie, won a lot of awards. Again, you know, year of the documentary. But this is one of those documentaries that people kind of felt was a little boring and tedious. Junior was an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie that I've never seen. And yeah, the less about that, the better. Legends of the Fall, which was a Brad Pitt movie. Again, this is a year where stars are falling, but also stars are rising. This was a big movie for Brad Pitt. Not talking about that. Reality Bites. So another common theme in 94 was the slacker. So there are a few movies made around this time about slackers. The 90s was like a big synonymous with slacker. And there's 2 movies, Reality Bites and SFW, which stands for So Fucking What. And that's what, so SFW really hits home that idea of the slacker. And the slacker's mentality was, who cares? You know, I don't care. I don't want to do anything. You know, we still kind of hear that today. Hell, I say that all the time. But those 2 movies were really about that lifestyle, lack of a better word. Stargate. This is a sci-fi movie starring Kurt Russell. I never got into it. I used to watch the TV show, but I don't really care. The Lion King. So this was number 1 in the top 10 grossing movies in 94 with over 763 million. Definitely like 2 billion worth today. It did win a Golden Globe for Best Picture, but was not nominated for an Academy Award. I'm sure that was a big deal at the time, and definitely be a big deal now. You know, don't hate me, but it's okay. I mean, I don't know. I think Pixar movies are better for the most part. So anyway, the next Karate Kid, that was the sequel to the Karate Kid that no one asked for, but starred a young Hilary Swank. The Page Master, that's the other movie. So that was a part live action, part animation with Macaulay Culkin, and that did not do well. And that might have been the last Macaulay Culkin movie. But yeah, this was not a good year for him. The Shadow, which was an early comic book movie that no one talks about. Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So this was interesting. This was a a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but Wes Craven, who hadn't done a Nightmare on Elm Street movie since the first one, had decided to come back to the series, but he wanted to do something different. And he wanted to do a meta horror movie. And what if, in creating Freddy Krueger, it has a life of its own, and the Freddy Krueger actually becomes real, becomes alive, and then he really wants to come into the real world. So a lot of the actors and people who made the movie, the original movie, stars themselves. So like Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger, plays himself. Wes Craven is in the movie, and he's also a hack, by the way, and he plays himself. I don't really care for this movie. It's okay. Actually, for the 13 nights of Halloween, when we watch those horror movies and then review them, we are going to watch every Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and except for the remake. And I am curious to rewatch this movie because I haven't watched it in a long time. Maybe I'll care for it. But what's interesting about this is, Wes Craven would go and make another meta horror movie, which was Scream. And so a lot of people think that this was his like blueprint of being able to make a meta horror movie, which he then hit gold with Scream, because this movie didn't do that well. Because I think that people who I think that people see Nightmare on Elm Street as a certain way, and he tried to change that way. I'm trying to. It's like there's a Friday the 13th movie in the series where it's not Jason, where it's a man who wants to get revenge on the death of his son, and he wants to, do this revenge, and he blames it on Jason. So he dresses up like Jason. He pretends to be Jason, and I'm sure people were not happy about that. I was like, you're making a Jason movie without Jason, after Jason's already been established. And how many times can I say the name Jason in a short sentence? So to do a Freddy movie and not really follow the same guidelines or theme, I think people were just not with it. So that's why he then scrapped that and started again, but this time made its own movie. And then that's where it worked. All right, we're done with the honorable mentions. Now we're just going to talk about the movies from 1994 I fucking hate and can't stand. Baby's Day Out. I hate that fucking movie's obnoxious. Beverly Hills Cop 3. Eddie Murphy it's not good. Clean Slate. I hate Dana Carvey and I hate his movies. Clifford, another annoying fucking movie. Color of Night with Bruce Willis. This is when Bruce Willis started to fall. This is a horror movie. It's just a sex. It's basically a Skinamax movie with a lot more money. Disclosure, same thing. Double Dragon, trying to make video game movies, and that's just an awful movie. I don't like. I'm not mentioning that. Don't like it. North is considered one of the worst movies of all time. Police Academy, I love Police Academy movies. I grew up with them. I love them. But this last movie, Mission to Moscow, is no bueno for me. I've never watched the whole thing, and it just ruined my film series. My favorite. It ruined the movies I love. The Flintstones. I don't care for this movie. I hate this movie. Mentioning it because it was actually number 6 in the top 10 grossing movies in 1994, with over 341 million. Hudsucker Proxy, directed by the Coen brothers, and I love the Coen brothers, but this movie's annoying. And Sylvester Stallone with The Specialist. Now, we mentioned True Lies. True Lies was in the top 10 with Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger did do Junior, and it was kind of like a high note and a low note for Schwarzenegger. But Sylvester Stallone in 94, not doing so great. He had done Demolition Man like a year prior, and people really liked it. But this movie, no one really cares for it. All right, that's it with the movies I hate. Now, some guilty pleasures. I'll go by this quick. Angels in the Outfield. Kids movie, family movie, but it's dopey. I like it. The Mighty Ducks 2, same thing. kid movie, family movie, but it's dopey. I like it. Death Wish 5, Charles Bronson, in his final Hollywood film. You know, the Death Wish movies are ridiculous. They became ridiculous. And 3, I think 3 is like my favorite one. A lot of these are family movies I think are just dopey, and I like them because they're dopey. Little Big League, it's about a kid who inherits a baseball team and then he becomes the manager. Dopey, love it. Little Giants, dopey, love it. Major League 2, I don't like sports. I don't play sports. I don't watch sports, but I like sports movies. Major League 2, Richie Rich, starring Macaulay Culkin. I love this movie. I love it because it's so bad. Again, the third Macaulay Culkin movie. And this one really cemented him getting the fuck out of Hollywood. Love it, though, because it's so bad. Street Fighter, another really bad video game movie. I mean, you know, Double Dragon's awful, but Street Fighter's just like over the top goofiness. Surviving the Game is an Ice-T movie. It's a B movie. Straight up B movie. Not talking to that. Not talking to that. The Mask. Now, this was in the top 10 grossing movies in '94, number 4. This is the fourth, 351 million. So this is the third Jim Carrey movie of '94, and this is the second movie that's in the top grossing. So again, if anything, '94 was the year of Carrey, because he had 3 fucking major hits, and 2 of them were in the top 10 grossing movies. I'm not talking about that. The Puppet Masters is a sci-fi horror movie. Donald Sutherland. Time Cop. Gotta love 90s Van Damme. Love it. Time Cop's probably one of my favorite. Yeah, it's probably my favorite Jean-Claude. I don't know. Either that or Bloodsport. Because at least Bloodsport is a real martial arts movie. And you know, he is trying to go down the Schwarzenegger route. And he's trying to do something different with Time Cop. But if you watch that movie, it could totally be remade, but not with him. And he just brings like an extra cheesiness to it, like a, you know, like a pizza with extra cheese. And that's what Jean-Claude Van Damme is in the '90s, extra cheese. But it's you know, it's a silly movie, based on a comic. Had a short-lived TV show. Totally be remade. That could be remade. And that will do it for me. Well, at least for 1994. We're done. And if you agree or disagree, just comment on the video or write something on the Facebook post. But yeah, all in all, that will do it for me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I wrote a book called Champ, Misanthrope of the Year. If you Google Champ, Amazon, and my name, ERIK, it will come up. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook. Every description will be below on the YouTube. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or any other podcast player, don't forget to join the Facebook group, join the YouTube book, join the YouTube page. And thank you. And if you don't agree with me, let me know, because my opinion could be kind of harsh. But with that said, I am Eric. I'm your fanboy, and this has been my opinion.